Novus, the new voice. Vox Novus, the new dimension. Vox Novus, thought and movement leaders who will share from their experience and offer tools to help us navigate our rapidly changing world. My name is Victor Fuhrman. Welcome to Vox Novus, the new voice. Ancient Greek philosophers shared the axiom, as above, so below. May this be extrapolated to also say, as inside, so outside. Is what we hold within us reflected not only in our person, but also our families, our communities, and our world, including nature and climate? Is it possible to heal our climate by starting the healing within ourselves? If so, what path would we need to follow to accomplish this? My guest this week on Vox Novus, Jack Adam Weber, says if we heal ourselves, we heal the planet. Jack Adam Weber is a celebrated poet, author, organic farmer, licensed acupuncturist, and Chinese medical herbalist. He's the author of 2 books of poetry, Nature of the Heart and In Love, celebrating the seasons of intimate relationship. Additionally, he's the creator of the Nourish practice, a unique and rejuvenating meditation and Qigong practice that doubles as a somatic template for emotional work. Hundreds of his articles and essays may be found at wakeupworld.com and collectiveevolution.com. Jack's overarching motto for modern living is, keep it outwardly simple and inwardly rich. His website is jackadamweber.com, and he joins me this week to share his path and his latest book, Climate Cure, Heal Yourself to Heal the Planet. Please welcome Jack Adam Weber. Welcome, Jack.
Hi, Victor. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And thank you so much for joining us this week. So, Jack, please begin by sharing with our listeners your path and how it led to your calling.
Well, I went to college originally. I was pre-med up at UC Berkeley, and I think I've always had an interest in healing, and that was a Western path at first. And then I had a series of catastrophes in my late teens that threw me off that path and onto a more introspective path and an integrative path and a connection with nature. My healing path sort of expanded and became more integrated from my original Western pre-med plans to become more holistic oriented. So my love of nature, my love of healing led me to Chinese medicine, and then in the midst of practice and paying attention to what's happening in the world and becoming privy to the extent and severity of the climate crisis, I realized that the earth was as much my patient as human beings. And since human beings are also my patients, I wanted to find a way to sort of blend our own healing, our own holistic design and healing with what was happening in the world and how to move beyond just a human-centric perception and experience of the world into a more interbeing experience and healing needed to address the crisis of our day.
I love your saying, the earth is also my patient. That is so beautiful. You refer to yourself as a climate change refugee. Please share what happened.
Yeah, I hesitated calling myself a climate change refugee because they're refugees that are true desperate refugees. And I was a desperate refugee for a short time, but I went back and forth whether to actually say those words because I don't take it lightly. And I did say it, and I think I put a qualifier before it. I don't remember. But that happened when I lost everything in Hawaii. I was living on my 5-acre farm, permaculture farm. I had built my own home. I had my clinic there, beautiful community. And the lava came in the middle of 2018 and wiped everything out. And so I had to evacuate, and all I had was my car and a tent and a few belongings. And so I popped around a bit and just tried to survive and keep my sanity for a time during the lava event, which is, yeah, I go into that story in the book.
Let me ask you about lava for a second, because obviously the Hawaiian Islands and other areas of the earth were created by volcanism and lava flows. What did that represent to you when it happened?
Well, it's obvious death and rebirth. It's the essence of creation, in a material sense, and so it's just the raw power of nature. I mean, that magma comes up from the center of the earth, and so I think I'm always humble to it, and I learned a number of lessons from that experience. Especially, I think the biggest takeaway from the lava experience was to enjoy and to find a heart in the process of what I do, and not so much in the goal of what I'm doing.
Mm. And how did these experiences lead to you writing Climate Cure, Heal Yourself to Heal the Planet?
Well, I think I was halfway through the process of what eventually became the final script for Climate Cure when the lava came, and the project was stopped at that point for the chaos that ensued. So the lava experience really informed the book in terms of putting me emotionally and mentally and physically in harm's way, and kind of really driving home what it's like to be at the whim of a climactic event that pulls the rug out from underneath you, and the collection the collection of poems that inspired Climate Cure is something that I've just come back around to. The book itself was written, I say it was written by accident. People look at me quizzically, not understanding how that's possible, how you can write a book by accident for 6 years. But the book began as an introduction to a collection of poems, and that introduction continued to grow and grow and grow and grow, and it was still attached to the poems. And before I submitted it to Llewellyn for publication, I divorced the poems from the prose manuscript. And I've just come around to finalizing that collection of poems that got waylaid behind the writing of Climate Cure.
And was there one poem in particular that was sort of inspiring for the creation of the book?
Not necessarily, but I do have a couple favorite poems. I can read one if you like.
Please.
Well, this is a poem. The title is Explosion, and I think it's one of my favorite poems in the collection. And the collection is titled Rebirth, and birth is spelled E-A-R-T-H. So it was written on New Year's Eve in my orchard in Hawaii several years ago. It goes like this: Explosion. The most dazzling explosion I witnessed tonight, the most dazzling explosion I witnessed tonight, was the wings of a moth on a papaya tree in the orchard, whose spread was a tapestry of bronze, ochre, indigo, and taupe. It lay there easy amid the noise, iridescent eyes glowing as no fireworks can, iridescent eyes glowing as no fireworks can. I thought to take a picture, but declined to celebrate such quiet ecstasy. We need so little when already bursting inside. We need so little when already bursting inside. Destroy so much trying to ignite what already smolders. Happy New Year, I wished the moth, as it flew away, leaving no smoke, no echo, no trash, just color preserved in flight.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
How may the insights, the wisdom that you gained and that you share in this book help those who are coping with the changes in physical, emotional, and spiritual climates and the events of the last year that really sort of reinforced and continue to unfold?
Well, it's curious that you asked that, because when the editor at the publishing company was going through the book, she wrote me a note and she said, "Thank you so much for writing this, and I'm learning so much, and it's helping me so much just cope with the pandemic." And I said, "I'm really glad that that's happening for you." And I was happy also because the book is so foundational and so core that it can really the wisdom, the practices in the book, and the insights in the book can really be applied to any kind of crisis, whether it's heartbreak or the pandemic or climate crisis or the political crisis or any kind of personal crisis. So it's really an emotional and spiritual support guide, and it goes in depth and it gets nitty gritty and it gets nuts and bolts. So it's not a book that floats above the surface. It really gives hands-on techniques, and a lot of those techniques and practices that are in the book are things that I've had to employ and that I've learned through my medical training and through my my self-cultivation practices and working with patients.
How may each of us embody the wisdom to reverse both internal and external climate crises?
Okay, so that question to me speaks to the bridge that's implied in the subtitle, which is "Heal Yourself to Heal the Planet," right? So the message that I try to give in the book, well, I'll just back up a bit, is I began to question, and I began an inquiry process many years ago about why more people don't care. Why do so many people not care and not care about the world that we live in and what's happening in the world? And I've been an activist for many years, and so for me, that's just a natural impulse that comes out of me, is to care for the world and to fight for justice and to try to affect healing in the world. So the book was what I came up with is that there are a lot of prevent us from moving from our interior, from our heads, from our own experience of ourselves to acting in the world. And I say something in the book, there's one line, and I always forget it verbatim, but it's something like 75% of the battle between our inner lives and our first steps in the world happens within that space, not in just doing something. So, in other words, the question was, what prevents us from acting in the world in a way for the greater good? And that's what I go into in the book, and it's a lot about how to heal our wounds, how to manage anxiety, and really how to manage our difficult emotions, and also find the support that we need to heal enough to come to overflow from our own sense of abundance and our own sense of integration to want to help.
In your book, you come up with the term the triangle of resilience. What is the triangle of resilience?
Perfect. That's a perfect question right now. So what I just said was talking about the support that we need to heal that inner world, right, to bridge the outer world. And the triangle of resilience relationships is a term that I coined, and it refers to a three-pronged support system, which is a triangle, and those three prongs or facets, what I call them in the book, is our relationship with ourselves. So having a robust and healthy relationship with ourselves, having an intimate connection with the natural world, and having a functional and robust relationship with other people, especially people in person in our own communities. So the triangle of resilience relationships is really the foundation from which we navigate what we need to heal in ourselves and in the world.
I would be safe to say that the majority of those listening to us have a deep sense of connection and a sense of stewardship with the natural world. How may we embrace our brothers and sisters who do not currently share that connection?
You know, in my experience, there are different ways into connection with the natural world, if I understand your question correctly. And there's a model of top-down and bottom-up, right? That applies to economics. It applies in psychology as well. And I think that we can use that model also for how we interface with the natural world and how we can introduce others to it. And the top-down model is sort of through education and through the intellect, right? And educating people about how wonderful it is to experience the natural world. But like lots of things, like sex, for example, you can talk all about it until you've done it. You don't know how great it can be, or sometimes how terrible it can be. But anyway, so that's one way, and I mentioned that in the book. And so there's some eco-education in a sense, explicating the science that's there for how the natural world really benefits us, and then the bottom-up model is just taking people out into the natural world. And people get pigeonholed in their, especially in the cities, and this is my life and I don't have time. And sometimes you just pick some up, you take them on an adventure, and just take them out. And then that's like behavior therapy in a way. You just take them out and they experience something, and it goes right in from the bottom up.
And you would advocate that this be something added to the curriculum of elementary schools and middle schools and high schools and colleges?
Oh, yes. Yeah, and why not have some of those classes right out in the natural world?
Yeah, in addition to science and technology and mathematics, also have the environment.
Yeah, and I actually read an article just a little bit ago about a country in Europe. I can't remember which one it is. I'm sure it's several by now, that during the pandemic are actually having children's classes out in the natural world. And I just thought that was awesome.
That is wonderful. How do we answer those who are followers of a certain political bent that deny or even refuse to consider what we know to be true?
That's the $1,000,000 question. Oh, listen, I'm going to say honestly, I don't have a big answer for that one. I'm relatively unsuccessful in that endeavor, and I think the best approach that I've had that doesn't quite approximate the goal of your question is just to accept them the best I can, and to love them anyway, and to not debate with them. And I love to debate. I learn a lot from debating, but it hasn't been fruitful. So I don't have a lot on that question.
As we love them through their denial, should we also engage those of us who have this mindset, this consciousness, in activism to support political candidates who do believe and do know and want to promote what we're talking about?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Absolutely. I've worked pretty hard at that through the last election cycle.
And I would think the other thing that we can do on a local community basis, here in New York, we have a wonderful recycling program that was established a few years ago, which is really working very well. But again, this was something that was done through law rather than people just taking it upon themselves to initiate the recycling program. This is something that really should be adopted in all communities, isn't it?
Sure. And sorry, Victor, what you just touch on is that aspect of care, right? That aspect of initiative, of that aspect of caring enough and being inspired enough to go do something and initiate something like that. And I think that that's extremely important these days, is to take the care that we have, the love that we have for what we care about, and to exercise that muscle of courage to make things happen in the world, and to go out and initiate.
Muscle of courage to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. My guest is Jack Adam Weber. He's the author of the book, Climate Cure, Heal Yourself to Heal the Planet. Jack, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and your poetry books and find out more about you and all of this wonderful work that you do.
Thanks, Victor. I think the easiest place to catch all those items is at my website, Jack Adam Weber, and Weber is spelled with one B, so it's Jack Adam Weber. And just go to the I think it's the shop area, and then there's a little category for books, and my books are there. And if you want, you might be able to find some of the poetry books on Amazon too, and Climate Cures on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. Website as well.
And Jack, what other offerings can listeners find on your website?
I do calligraphy work, so I do calligraphy work of my poems, and I have those as greeting cards that are there. I also have original artwork with my calligraphy poetry on them. I also have the Nourish practice, which is very dear to my heart, and I won't get into describing the Nourish practice right now, but that's there. Oh, you described it a bit in the intro. And then I have a regular blog that I think is of great interest, and I contribute to that regularly. That's at my website too.
And we'll be back with more of Jack Adam Weber after these words on the Om Times Radio Network.
The best of the holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. Om Times Radio. IOM FM. Om Times Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Om Times, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of Om Times Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going Om. My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
So I'm a cat, and I just moved in with this new human, and she's got this little toy she's always playing with, all day long. Tap, 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 bloop, bloop. She can't put it down. There it is. Oh, and get this. She even talks to it. Last week she asked it for Chinese, and guess what? Egg rolls showed up. Like magic. Humans have cool toys.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week is Jack Adam Weber. He's the author of Climate Cure, Heal Yourself to Heal the Planet. Jack, in Climate Cure, you share an inner path to sustainability. How may we find that path?
Well, I think it's the way that I context sustainability in the book is through the yin-yang symbol, which is a balance of light and dark. And the yin-yang symbol is also a model for life, death, and rebirth. So that is the cycle of nature, and that's how the natural world grows, falls away, and replenishes itself. And that's a model of regeneration as well. So that inner path, I try to look at how those same processes of life, death, and rebirth happen within ourselves. And the primary path that I describe and encourage in the book is the process of grief work, which is really going into our core love wounds, childhood wounds, the places where we're stuck and wounded and stymied, and working through those pains to free up our hearts. And that in that process through grief, which sort of initiates us into inner death and rebirth work, like dark night of the soul stuff. That's how I draw that connection. So the more that we can take care of our own wounds, the less we act out that maxim that goes, hurt people, hurt others, right? So as we take care of our own hurts, we can actually hurt others less, including the planet.
So many are grieving the loss of loved ones, a grief often amplified by the changes that ensued with the pandemic and political crisis. In Climate Cure, you share that grief is a gift. How so?
I call grief the great polisher of the soul, right? So it sort of takes away what I call the encrustations around our hearts, and those are the wounds that I was talking about, the places of trauma, and grief is and grief work, which I discuss in the book. I sort of differentiate between grief, the emotion, and the process of grief work, which I describe as going through past wounds. And so grief is a great gift in that sense that it helps dissolve the pain and the heartaches that we carry, so that we can be more free to love and to receive love, to give love, and to share our gifts with the world and not be burdened by our own pain as much.
With reference to trauma and grief and other emotional wounds, you share that there are benefits derived from difficult emotions. What are those benefits?
All right. Give me just a moment here. I'm going to pop into a section of the book where I actually list them. So on page 42 in the book, in the chapter titled The Yin and Yang of Emotional Intelligence, I describe 10 benefits of difficult emotions. And I'm just going to read the first few. Number 1 is to heal through past and current trauma, including losses caused by climate change. 2, to rebirth our finer jewels of being human, such as compassion, empathy, creativity, and wisdom. 3, to overcome fear and denial, what I refer to as our fear mark in the next chapter, to face difficult realities, including distressing climate change news and reports. And I'll give one more, number 4, to better empathize, communicate, work cooperatively with one another, and resist business as usual.
How do we develop that compassion? I think that's one of the keys.
Which compassion? Just compassion generally?
Compassion generally. How do we become more compassionate and more receptive to the needs of others?
Well, I appreciate your saying that. And I think that, again, almost like top down and bottom up, I think there's an inward-outward dynamic, and we can go either outward or inward. And, in the book, I talk a lot about compassion, and I also distinguish between sort of like mustering compassion and becoming compassion. And becoming compassion pertains to the inner-outer dynamic, and that's a lot through when we can tend and abide and self-love ourselves through our own pain and our own healing of that pain through grief work. In my experience, that helps consolidate and increase a capacity for compassion. And I found that when I went through that process in my 20s, I just became much more compassionate. And another way, if someone doesn't want to or can't do that kind of inner work right now, just practice. Again, like go out into the world, just like we talked earlier about taking someone out into the natural world. Go out and do service work. Go out and tend to the natural world. Do a tree planting project. Go, volunteer at a natural disaster site. Help other people in distress. And just our exposure in that way helps exercise and helps wake up that compassion inside ourselves.
When the pandemic was fully bloomed in the early part of last year, I had written that it was time for radical compassion and radical kindness. Is it time to be radical?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe a little too late. Maybe a little too late to be radical.
No, it's never too late to be radical. And it's funny you say that, Victor, because the one of the working titles before Climate Cure became what it is was Radical Sanity. And that really encapsulated some of the message of the book. And now Radical Sanity is a section in the book, and I sort of talk about what Radical Sanity is. And it has a lot to do with integrity and honesty, and caring about the world.
Absolutely. You've likened emotional wounds to incrustation of the heart. What are some of the ways we may remove the crust?
Right. So that sort of ties together a couple points that I mentioned earlier. So through grief work is the primary way that I expound in the book, and I lead readers through some initial processes of grief work to kind of dip their toes and dip their feet. So these encrustations around the heart are sort of the places where we feel stuck that I was talking about before. When if you go through a difficult experience, you go through a heartbreak, and it's like, if you don't tend to yourself, if you don't grieve, if you don't feel your pain, if you don't let out your anger, if you don't work those things out and reflect and look at your mistakes, and it's a whole process. You don't go through that stuff, you end up with conglomerations inside, and these prevent us from being as whole and as fluid and as dynamic and as vital as we can.
You come up with another term, climate anxiety. What is it, and how may we address it? Right.
So climate anxiety, I didn't come up with a term per se, but I like to, climate anxiety is an umbrella term. A lot of people think it's just anxiety, and it does refer just to anxiety, but it's a bit of a confusion in the kind of ecopsychology world. And climate anxiety is a catch-all for all kinds of distress. So I like to refer to climate anxiety in that larger umbrella as eco-distress. And distress speaks to the many different difficult emotions that we have, like grief and despair, and fear and anxiety, and anger. So any of the difficult emotions that we experience in relationship to climate change and the condition of the world are sort of climate anxiety, eco-distress.
And speaking of grief, in Climate Cure, you share that grief is a gift. How so?
I was talking about this yin-yang cycle earlier, and in Chinese medicine that I practice, grief pertains to the yin side, to autumn. And I draw this corollary in the book, which is a really fascinating poetic corollary of how grief work is a time to be fallow, right? So when I've gone through grief, when I've counseled and ministered to others going through grief, even friends, you don't want to do anything when you're really grieving. It's like sometimes you can just barely get up. You don't want to go out and party. You don't want to go have fun. And it really, you don't even want to eat a lot of the time. So grief is really like this inner fallow time. And I think that as we can abide it individually and collectively, when we can celebrate and honor, even through ritual, right? And even the model of the seasons that I share in the book, that's central to Chinese medicine, that's a model of following the seasons. So there's time for activity, there's time for life and growth, and then there's time for rest and decay and death and letting things go. And I think that, following this that's the model of sustainability I was referring to earlier. And grief really pertains to that yin side of where things fall away, things let go. And if we don't exercise that in ourselves, then how can we really exercise that in the world, right? And so that, when a lack of inner grief, for me, shows up in ways of perpetual progress, right? Like constant progress, constant activity, burnout, lack of sleep, overwork. Those are all outer dynamics reflecting our inner failure to not honor these cycles of life, death, decay, death and rebirth.
An extension of this process is those that are in the role of caregivers right now. Caregivers who are taking care of their own family, the elderly and the infirmed, who are taking care of others who are in institutionalized care. What advice would you have for people in that position?
Wow. I mean, just the term self-care comes up, and it's, it's, as practicing medicine myself, and everyone experiences this in their lives, hopefully, that there are times that we have to replenish and we have to take care of ourselves. So, just finding ways to take care of the best that we can. And, maybe now's a good time to mention this Nourish practice. It was a time in my life in Hawaii where I was building my house, I was practicing. I didn't even have time really to exercise and stretch, for a period of many months, almost a year. And so the Nourish practice kind of developed out of this not having time to go out, or even the energy a lot of times to go out and do things. So I developed this really internal practice through the breath that helped me really relax and alleviate a lot of stress. And I think that's a wonderful tool to help if you feel overwhelmed and anxious and burned out, especially.
And how may our listeners find out more about that practice?
The Nourish practice is on my website, and just you can find it. I think there's a I think it's a top tab. If not, just go into the shop area, and there's a whole there's sample tracks, and it's an audio series that I have at my website.
It's interesting.
And I highly recommend it.
Absolutely. I was watching it, and I absolutely, I've said this before in other contexts, and that so many of us who have been and who are caregivers in any aspect are so ready to run out and take care of everyone else and forget to give ourselves that same gift. And there was an old lyric from a Moody Blues song from 1970 which said, "When you stop and think about it, you won't believe it's true that all the love you've been giving has all been meant for you." Why is it so hard for us to do that for ourselves?
Well, I'll answer one way that might be not what you're expecting, but I think it's hard to love ourselves. I think it's, on a purely emotional level. It's like I can, people talk about self-love and loving ourselves, but I found that self-love works better when I do things that are kind to myself. Sometimes maybe I'll just give myself a little self-hug or something, and I'll feel some emotion to myself. But I really think that we're wired to receive love from others. We're deeply social beings, deeply communal beings, and I think it's no evolutionary mistake that we're wired to receive love and care from someone else. I mean, I know for myself that when other people love me, when other people hug me, when other things do kind things for me, it just feels a lot better than when I do them for myself.
One of these areas that many people have an issue with is what Carl Jung referred to as the shadow. You share that we also have a climate shadow. Are these shadow aspects the same, and how may we approach them?
Oh, big question. Another big question. They may not be exactly the same, but I do feel that's the continuum, that the inner shadow, sort of what I was talking about before, like some of our own hurt, right, gets manifested by hurt people, hurt others. And I refer to climate crisis as the manifestation of the collective human shadow, meaning that all the, shadow is basically what we've denied in ourselves, all the things that we think are not me, not us, right? So that's my shadow, and that's both positive aspects of myself that I fail to acknowledge, as well as quote unquote negative aspects of myself that I fail to acknowledge. So one of the messages in the book that coincides with Heal Yourself to Heal the Planet is that unless we do, and shadow work I think is an absolute cornerstone of everything we're dealing with today. I encourage everyone to engage shadow work. And a friend and colleague of mine named Matt Licata, he's a psychologist. He does wonderful webinars on shadow work, and I encourage people to look up Matt Licata and to dip in. There's also a whole chapter in my book on shadow work, and I take a really unique approach to it. But yeah, shadow work is that continuum between our inner selves into the outer world, and the more that we do shadow work and integrate our dark aspects into the light of ourselves, the more light and goodness we can create outwardly.
My guest is Jack Adam Weber. His book is Climate Cure, Heal Yourself to Heal the Planet. We'll be back with more of Jack after these words on the Om Times Radio Network.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
A social distancing tip.
Keeping your distance from others is important in slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are some fun things to do alone. Read a book, take a walk, unpack your suitcase from that trip you took last September, paint a self-portrait, catch up on a TV series, do a puzzle. Remember, we should all stay home to lower the risk for everyone. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Hello, I'm Lisa Berry. Join me every Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for Light on Living. A chance to see new, hear different, and feel more as I shine the spotlight on all the ways to lighten the load of life's challenges. Light on Living is your link to that new way you're looking for, that new understanding that will enhance your life, and that positive connection that will support your growth. So join me and you'll gain insight and start to see things in a new way that motivates you.
Hi, we're the Goo Goo Dolls. We're fortunate that our daughters have what they need to grow and learn. But that isn't the case for nearly 13 million kids in the U.S. that struggle with hunger.
Childhood hunger is a heartbreaking reality that Feeding America is working to change. Each year, the Feeding America network of food banks rescues billions of pounds of good food that would have gone to waste and provides it to families and children in need.
You can help kids in need in your community by visiting feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Coping-19, brought to you by CDC and the Ad Council.
With so much loss, you may feel like you can't handle it all. Meditation or other spiritual practices can help you feel more grounded and better able to cope.
Find more self-care and coping tips at coping-19.org.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week is Jack Adam Weber. He's the author of Climate Cure, Heal Yourself to Heal the Planet. Jack, what is sacred permission, and how do we engage in the practice?
So, sacred permission is another term that I coined, and I coined it and developed the concept based on the grief work that I shared earlier. And our culture has a lack of important rituals that I think are very important to moving into responsible adulthood. So sacred permission is a process for moving into sacred adulthood that's more of an inner process, right? So it's more of an integrity process and an integration process. And that process is going through our childhood wounds, because if we carry unhealed childhood wounds in a big way inside of us, how can we truly be adults? How can we truly be responsible adults? And I think what we see, and I mentioned it in the book because it's relevant to the climate crisis, in the sense that what we're doing to the planet is highly irresponsible, right? And it's not adult, it's not mature, it's irresponsible. So sacred permission is the process of becoming a responsible, integrated, wise person by going through and healing ourselves so that we can do better in the world and to others.
And in context with sacred permission, one of the things that I've always shared and taught is the art of sacred listening. In this world that we live in today, so many people need to be heard, really listened to, without the need for interruption or interjection, just to allow themselves that space to be heard sacredly. Do you agree with that?
100%, yes.
Yeah, something that we've lost apparently in the society. We're so anxious to get our 2 cents in with every conversation that we fail to really embrace and listen to what the other person is trying to share.
Right. And Victor, if I can just share in that model that I was sharing before of the seasons in Chinese medicine, one of the elements in Chinese medicine, one of the 5 elements is the earth element. And that element, the spiritual emotional quality associated with that element is self-reflection and listening and pausing, right? And so it's just an example of how this sacred quality that you mentioned is reflected in that model of wholeness.
Absolutely. We sort of touched upon this before, but I'm going to take it to a different level. Growing up in Brooklyn, New York in the 1950s and 1960s, I enjoyed it when our school would take us on trips to farms in New Jersey, which was a long trip in those days for us. Those trips were as close to the natural world as most city dwellers could get. How made those of us, especially those living in urban environments at this time, find that sense of connection with nature?
It's funny when you shared that memory of your childhood, it brought up a memory from my childhood. I grew up in Connecticut. My parents taught at Wesleyan University, and they would take us out. And one of my favorite places, our favorite places, was Lyman Orchards. And it was a great place where we'd go pick apples and have cider, and it was a wonderful outdoor thing. Anyway, just a little memento I'm sharing there. So in terms of being in a city environment and not having great access to abundant nature, I think it's really, beginning to cultivate the ritual of appreciating what we can. So, whether it's that proverbial, patch of grass in the sidewalk, or making better friends and getting to know the nuances of the trees in our backyard. And if we don't have trees in the backyard, you can look to the heavens. People forget that the sky itself is part of the natural world, or even a bug that's crawling on the railing. So, and I have some exercises like that. Actually, I'm just remembering in Climate Cure, exercises to help, uncommon exercises to help develop our connection with nature when especially when we don't have ready opportunity for that.
One of the lessons from the experience that began in the spring of 2020 is how many of us took for granted the gift of socialization and community at a time when we still have to observe physical distancing and for some isolation. How may we get back to that sense of togetherness and community?
Well, I'll be honest and say that there's no substitute for being in person with other people. And that's, as I mentioned earlier, that's really how we've evolved, to be in person with each other, exchanging non-verbally, verbally, through action, through work together, and through celebration. So it's hard to replace that, but there are ways that we can approximate that. And, there's getting on the phone, there's doing video calls, and those are kind of obvious, and those have been shared a lot in the media for how to stay connected, but also picking up things to read that share the intimacy of connection. Maybe it's a love story, maybe it's a story about a family or a community or a tribe or a group of people or a business, or something that fills our psyche with the experience, right, of community. So I know it's not ideal, but we just have to make do. And those are some ways that I've found helpful and heard other people share as well.
Do you think that we took for granted the beauty of the freedom that we share in this country and in many of the Western parts of the world, that we had that ability to just be together, commune together in any way we chose? Do you think we sort of took that for granted?
I think so. I think that's obvious among a lot of us, and and at the same time, for myself, having gone through the lava experience, for example, and another crisis in my life prior to that, where I was really helped and supported by my community, that really helped bring awareness to my connection and reverence and gratitude for other people in my life. So, personally, that has been not taken for granted very much. But now with the isolation, I think I can appreciate it even that much more.
You offer many wonderful exercises in your book for all of the processes that we've been talking about during the course of this interview. Is there one or two that you are favorites for yours, or would you like to share?
I think the first that just comes to my mind is those grief work exercises. I just feel that those are comprehensive and deep and really poignant. I think it depends on what people are going through. In the book, there's exercises throughout the book, as you know, and then at the end of the chapter, there are exercises. And the anxiety chapter is also coming to mind. I think that anxiety is probably the most distressing emotion, maybe even more so than grief. Certainly grief and anxiety, you're right up there. But there's a lot, the anxiety chapter is really excellent in the book. I put a lot of work and thought into it, and there are lots of exercises for how to mitigate anxiety. So I'd say that the grief work and the anxiety work, those are the ones that come to mind, especially. And then the shadow work chapter has some really poignant exercises on shadow work. So how about those three?
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. What is your personal hope for each of us and for our world?
Oh, boy. In a nutshell, Victor, I'd say developing integrity. And I think that's how I start out the book in the introduction and the first chapter, even into the second chapter, of just, and that begins to establish that foundational work inside ourselves. Like, how do we start with caring, right? How are we going to address, how are enough of us going to address the crises of our world without caring enough? So that kind of caring is developing, a sense of integrity to care about ourselves and the world actively enough. And that sense of integrity also, part and parcel of it is honesty. And I've often said that all healing begins with self-honesty, right? Personal healing develops with self-honesty. So I think, and honesty has been trashed these days, especially in the political arena. So I think really cultivating a sense of honesty and integrity and care, those three that overlap in a Venn sense.
What would you like readers to take away from Climate Cure, Heal Yourself to Heal the Planet?
Well, I'm tempted not to answer that question. Because I don't think I would do it justice. I think that whatever readers have taken away from this interview, which I've really appreciated, and Victor, I want to just take this moment instead to say thank you so much for taking so much care with the questions that you have asked me and that you formulated. You have embodied what I've been sharing in this interview, and that's part of why it's been so wonderful to meet you and to be interviewed by you, because your questions are meaty, they're sincere, they're heartfelt, they're deep, they're poignant, and I love that, and I appreciate you for it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and I'm going to thank you again at the end in a minute or so, but I want to talk about one other thing. You're a wonderful poet. You call your poetry living poetry. Why?
I don't call all my poetry living poetry, but I do try to promote the notion that poetry is a living thing. And so poetry is this thing that's a written work of art, but that artwork, like Brian Eno, the musician, likes to say that art should trigger experience in us. So I've also said that poetry should how do I say it? Poetry should dissolve for the heart to live. That's it. Poetry should dissolve for the heart to live. So not all poetry, but a lot of poetry, right? It should bring us alive. And so in that sense, poetry is not just this thing that's on a page, but it's how it inspires us. And also it's to live symbolically and to see metaphor in the world. And that helps us join with the world. When we see ourselves in the world and when we see the world in ourselves, that's the essence of poetry, right? It creates and knits the world back together for a sense of true intimacy and oneness.
The wisdom of Jack Adam Weber, his book, Climate Cure, Heal Yourself to Heal the Planet. Jack, one more time, please tell our listeners where they can get your books and find out more about you and all of this wonderful work.
Thanks, Victor. I just go to my website. I have a bunch of articles out there on Wake Up World and Collective Evolution, but really my website is a great landing spot for my poetry, Climate Cure, for my blog, and I was also reminded that I have some herbal products at my site that might be really helpful for people to really help with the immune system, to help deal with symptoms when no other care is available. So I want to just share a little plug for that people have reported having great help and great physical health support through those two products, CV1 and CV2. Those are the shop section of my site.
And your site is?
JackAdamWeber.com. JackAdamWeber.com.
Jack, thank you so much for joining us and sharing all of your wisdom.
Thanks, Victor. It's been awesome being here.
And thank you for joining us on Vox Novus. I'm Victor, the Voice Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.